So in this segment, we're going to be discussing Woking Council declares bankruptcy with £1.2 billion in deficit and over almost £2 billion in debt. So the English Council is almost £2 billion in debt, and this would feel like a story of corruption on a grand scale. But oh boy, it does not look like that's the case. This looks like the overambitious nature of a council combined with risky bets. We're talking old school incompetency potentially instead of malice, fueled by austerity and a lack of oversight. An absolutely mental story. This is the story of Woking Council, a council that is not working for its constituents. A cluster of skyscrapers that look more like Singapore than Surrey rises high over the centre of Woking. Called Victoria Square, the trio of towers, the biggest is 34 stories. It's unusual for a brand new landmark development in that backing for them didn't come from a Gulf state, Chinese investors or a global asset manager. Instead, the proud owner of Britain's tallest building outside of London is Woking Borough Council. This is a council who decided to bet big on certain investments, mostly properties. Their motives for now are pretty unclear. I could not find much apart from trying to raise capital for the council. That's the motive. It doesn't look like corruption in my opinion. There is a lack of space to build, so they went height for height. This makes some sense if you're a big city, but they're not. It's a town outside of London, inside Surrey, on the commuter belt, which maybe they thought they could deal with a lack of housing, but also attract people, more likely commuters, or people who could not afford to live in London to move to Woking. This is the most charitable explanation I can give you. So this is London here, this is Woking down here. So it's just outside of London, it's not too far. People commute via Woking, or they probably live in Woking and commute to London. So for context, you can see it on the map. The investments. Not all the council's projects have been successful. According to The Guardian, it offered one company £250 million to redevelop the town's football stadium and build 1,000 homes, but the scheme ran into buffers after planning said it was only suitable for 93 dwellings. And the council should have really known how much land they have, which is suitable and which isn't. So for them to want to build that many homes directly as a council makes little sense. If this was for mostly social housing, I would support it, definitely. But given the councils normally give out planning permission, they should have been able to check the areas themselves before any major plans were done and any money was borrowed. Wanting to build 1,000 homes is very ambitious, 1,000 houses, and being told you can only do 93 must have been some of the fuel for wanting the bigger towers. I guess if you can't build on the green fields, which is, unbuilt on land, nice and green, you can't build on, if there's not a lot of brown fields there, that's, those are typically used for manufacturing or industrial work. It does put you in a tough spot, but that does not give you the excuse to pull off a chump move. And they've gone on to say, quote, "It's absolutely ridiculous," end quote, said Graham Christie, a councillor who in 2019 defected from the Tories to the Liberal Democrats over the borrowing, tipping the council into no overall control. He retired. He worries the debt pile could prove unsustainable, saying, quote, "The Borough Council seems to have turned into a property developer from £5 million schemes in central Woking to ones worth £500 million. We are in a pretty desperate situation," end quote. It's just nuts that a council would have a portfolio like a Monopoly man or, someone winning at Monopoly. What was the plan here? You could have construction projects worth £500 million. This should not be for a council to do. Clearly there's an issue when the private sector are not building these sorts of projects. But, these were built in collaboration with the private sector, and we'll talk about the people chosen. But for the council to do this, there should have been way more oversight. I think the government should be more involved with these sorts of housing projects if the money is to come from the public sector. And that's a hint on who kind of owns the debt. They could have set up the procurement deals, or the government could have gotten really good deals as well. Well, not this current government, obviously. Maybe it's a bad idea. I don't know now, because this lot are not very good. In what is thought to be the biggest financial failure in local government history, the Surrey Council said it had issued a Section 114 notice in response to the, quote, "unprecedented financial challenges facing the town." The issuing of a Section 114 notice restricts all new spending, with the exception of protecting vulnerable people and statutory services and pre-existing commitments. It's an admission that a local council does not have the resources to meet their current expenditure. Woking joins Thurrock, Croydon and Slough as the latest English councils to run into trouble after ploughing cash into risky commercial investments. And these councils are doing this because they either don't or can't raise council taxes. These are the taxes that local people within a constituency pay, within the town. I pay council tax, for example, for the town I live in. So that means they're trying to find other means to raise capital. It's just nuts that austerity has pushed councils to try this sort of nonsense. I guess the desperation to tell voters that a party can improve their lives and, the services there and offer them lower taxes is just a lie. People are just ready to believe it. This has real world consequences for the people that live there. Their council services will be cut down even more. Things like community centres and libraries, which are vital to people, among other things. Even things as mundane as bin collections are important, and things that sometimes people take for granted. And if the bins aren't collected, you're risking a public health scare. The council had planned for 7 affordable homes to be built at Bonsley Lane, but papers have said that project is no longer viable. And these sorts of things do have impact on real people's lives here. It might have been people might have been offered these places and no longer can move in because they're not going to be built. The Tiny Home Counties Authority is in the affluent London commuter belt, warned it had failed for the past 15 years to set aside money to keep up with the payments on a vast debt pile amassed under its former Tory leadership, and 15 years puts the debt pile at the start of New Labour, so we're talking around the time of the financial crash. So I'm guessing the debt probably starts from there. Then you have austerity, which was incredibly aggressive, leading these councils trying to generate money via investments. And it's not to blame Labour for the start of the debt pile, because they had much bigger things to worry about rather than councils' debt. That financial crash was gnarly. Racked up to finance the building and acquisition of a vast empire of commercial assets. Its investments included a complex of high-rise towers, including a 4-star Hilton hotel, public plazas, parking facilities, and shops. Now, not all of this is bad. The high-rise towers is a bit dodgy, in my opinion, given the price of those. Especially when was there any utility for them to build one? Did they need one? Hilton Hotel makes no sense. That seems like a vanity thing. Not sure how they even ran it. Did councillors get a discount there? Did they run projects there for the council? Or was it just run as a normal hotel? Especially with COVID, that makes no sense. Shops could make sense because they could rent out these places to more kind of niche shop owners for niche products to bring people into the city. Sometimes people will travel pretty far to visit random shops if they have what they want, especially if things have to be imported and it's very expensive. The parking places could make more sense. Easy money if you want to charge people a low amount, a couple of quid, park your car here for an hour or two or all day. Or, they could make the car park free to encourage people to do more shopping in the town centre. Free or cheap parking is a game changer for bringing people into a town centre, especially when you have to compete with online sellers. But the major purchases would be those towers, which don't sit right with me. You're talking potentially hundreds of millions of pounds in those. Woking warned its debts were forecasted at £2.6 billion, while it had taken the uncomfortable step of writing down the value of its investment portfolio by more than £600 million, in a reflection that its property holdings were worth far less than previously anticipated. And we're entering into potentially a housing crash by the looks of it, due to the Tories and the Bank of England. Higher interest rates and inflation mean that people are not looking in to buy housing, and the values of houses is coming down, which makes a really bad time to hold hundreds of millions of pounds in properties. Anne-Marie Barker, the council's Liberal Democrat leader, whose party took over from the former Tory administration after it was voted out last year, said there was a danger that services could be cut as a consequence. She said, quote, "We're going to have to look at those and provide the services in a very different way in the future. Inevitability, it's not going to be such a good service as it was in the past," end quote. And this is what I mean by real-world consequences. The debt in Woking is staggering, says Meg Hillier, the Labour chair of the Commons Public Accounts Committee, adding that the government needed to have, quote, stronger oversight, end quote, over how councils were investing. The council claims that the government were blind to the extreme risk councils were taking to raise funds. Again, this is a byproduct of austerity and reckless spending of taxpayers' money. I guess it's all fun and games because it's not your money. You're spending taxpayers' money, so they don't care. Many councils piled into property and other commercial enterprises to raise money to fill gaping holes in their budgets and to undertake regeneration projects after sharp cuts from central government funding introduced under the Conservatives' austerity drive. Kevin Davis, the Conservative group leader of Woking Council, said his party had issued an apology to residents for the financial position the local authority was now in, while arguing that council investments were made in good faith in an attempt to regenerate the town. And, you can argue in good faith all day, but an apology is not good enough here, Kev, given the state the council's in. You're talking billions of pounds here, Chief. This is going to impact people for decades. You're talking real-world impacts now. Davis said, quote, "Remember the cost measures coming through every year with the revenue grant being steadily reduced. It's safe to construct an argument that says that period led to the council to look for other ways to generate that missing income," end quote. And I think that doesn't make sense given the debt pile started in around 2008, so you can't blame the Tory party cuts for it fully. But him blaming central government is pretty funny given that they're both Conservatives. The Conservatives were the majority party from 2010 to 2015 and have been in charge of government since then. Especially they can't blame the Lib Dems. You have to blame your own party. So instead of being open about the council's financial situation or raising council taxes, they decide to gamble with other people's money. He added that the pandemic had significantly affected the valuation of the council's assets, but also suggested further investigation was required to establish whether the former Tory administration had adequate checks and balance in place when it was making investment decisions. He said, quote, "It's likely the answer is no, it was not robust enough, it is more than just COVID," end quote. And, it's ironic he's admitted that a person who was in the Tory party, in that council, saying it was the council that got us into this mess and they lacked oversight. So essentially, again, he's blaming central government for this. The Tories in the council were more than happy to borrow money and spend it. The people who allowed these loans have to accept partial responsibility for this. But at the end of the day, it wasn't them who spent the money. There has to be further consequences for, this council. Like, how can they manage to get into millions of pounds of debt? And so, who actually loaned them the money? So it was the government. The government had lent this company the money via the Treasury. The arm of the Treasury is called the Public Work Loan Board. I don't know if it existed under Labour, but it exists under Tories. But why the government are doing loans instead of grants is beyond me, but clearly there was little oversight as to where the money was going. Councils trying to raise money via investments when councils are meant to deal with things like bin collections, not property portfolios. Clearly the monopoly man was running this council, but there's no way the government will recoup this money. If they had funded the councils properly and had better oversight, perhaps these councils and many others would not be in the mess they're in. But those sorts of expectations are way too high for most English politicians, happy to waste your money on nonsense. Local councils have been on a borrowing and investment spree in an attempt to sidestep the impacts of austerity, with government-backed spending power slashed by more than 50%, significantly more than the rising council tax. Many local leaders say they had little choice. With Woking's debt expected to grow to £2.4 billion within 5 years, the highest borrowing figure relative to its size of any local authority in Britain, the town's population is just 100,000 people. The debt per capita, per person must be insane. At least 5 other debt-laden councils are on the government's red list. So you've got these ones here. You've got Woking, Warrington, Thurrock, Spelthorne, Runnymede and Eastleigh. Warrington being the next one of major concern, I think. Singapore and Surrey. Woking's, skyscrapers come about in part because of the town's location. Ringed by greenbelt land, planners reckoned high-rise blocks would help house its growing population while keeping its residents in surrounding leafy villages happy. But the town, known as the setting for much of H.G. Wells' War of Worlds, has seen battles of its own as locals accuse the council of trying to convert their home into Singapore on way. Instead of War on Worlds, you had war by NIMBYs, because they wanted to keep the NIMBYs happy in the little villages, and they didn't want to build too many houses because they would get annoyed their house value would come down. So what did the council do? They started building high. In Woking, Thames Way is building more than 1,000 homes, a leisure centre and shops in a 6-year regeneration plan for Sherwood, a suburb first expanded in the 1950s to rehome blitzed out East Londoners. However, Thames Way has faced problems. Plans for its energy arm to supply district heating in Milton Keynes, 60 miles away from Woking, it's quite a distance, have been called a, quote, money pit, end quote, after the project amassed 32 million of debt, pounds worth of debt. It looks like the company building these homes may be in financial trouble. I don't want to insinuate anything, but asking a company in a significant amount of debt, any company, to build so many houses seems like it could be trouble. Or maybe it will be fine. I don't know. The council has had previous trouble with picking the right partner. It has lined up £250 million in taxpayer-funded loans to support a plan by Hertfordshire property developer Wayne Gold to almost quadruple capacity at Woking FC Stadium to 9,000 seats and build 1,000 homes. Gold had failed with similar stadium-cum-housing projects at Braintree Town. Essex, a cross-party group of councillors, criticised his lack of experience and said the local council had not done enough credit reference checks when offering the £250 million loan. Gold, who could not be reached for comment by The Guardian, said he had, quote, successfully relocated, end quote, football grounds at Malden, Bishop's Stortford and East Ham. Despite the backing of the local authorities office, Woking councillors voted down the plans. An appeal was rejected by the Secretary of State for Housing, ending the council's development amid financial agreements with Gold. And, again, it's a weird decision to pick him. I'm not going to go into too much, but, I don't know how successful, how much of a failure he is. But evidently the Secretary of State rejected it, so that says a lot. When you look at Victoria Square, Northern Irish property company Moylan, who owns 52% of the project, had seen 4 of its other portfolio companies fall into administration, with debts owed to the Bank of Ireland worth £188 million. And again, it just looks like a poor choice of company given the debt levels, but perhaps these debts were newer, and the asset failures are kicking in due to interest rate rises, which is more recent. I don't know why the council would not set up a company itself and manage these projects. Maybe it would have made more sense because there would be a corporate veil of sorts to protect the council. But again, I'm just not sure what the council have done here. The debt levels, the companies that were given contracts or were looked at as options, blaming austerity makes some sense, but did it have to be this way for them? I don't know. And, quote, the more you borrow, the bigger the numbers become, which is typically how borrowing works. It's from the National Audit Office, saying that, councils across England have ploughed almost £7 billion into commercial property in the 3 years to March 2019. Almost 15 times what they spent in the 3 preceding years. And it's a bad time to be a property owner, potentially, because of, the fall of the prices of housing. Across the UK, local authorities' debt levels have surged by almost 50% since 2014 to stand at 130 billion at the end of last year. This is a byproduct of austerity, huge budget cuts, and dishonesty from councils. But I guess tax increases don't win you votes. Most councils invested within their local boundaries, using cheap funds from the PWLB, the government arm, which offered low-cost long-term borrowing, piggybacking off the sovereign interest rates. I think essentially they sold bonds. But some went further, hoovering up commercial assets further afield and lending taxpayers money to generate a financial return. Essentially becoming a bank then. Local lenders say the hunt for investment income was an inevitable response to a decade of austerity, with councils' spending power slashed by more than a quarter since 2019. So effectively what these councils have done is blame central government here. And the government were happy to offer these loans instead of offering actual funding. Billions of pounds worth of loans here. The levels of economic illiteracy and the levels of economic illiteracy is astounding and shows you the money was always there, but to give these huge loans to councils who don't know how to spend all these millions makes no sense. What was the Tories' plan here? That these councils would be able to pay back the loans with interest. This is what happens when you run a country like a company. It's just not how countries work. There would not have been a lot of housing built here yet, but given the housing crisis, now I guess anything is better than nothing. But it does show you that there are real world impacts here, that affordable homes are no longer viable for the council. They could have set up these places with special conditions that they can only be purchased by local people as well, to help the area keep sustainable housing, but it's not viable now. They're planning to build 7, but it's not going to happen. Labour raised concerns about the impact of Woking's reputation of Woking's reputation to protect people from council tax rises. And it sounds like a dumb point from Labour, but it makes sense. Tory councils have pushed the fact that some of them have lower taxes versus Labour councils, and have used it as a way to win votes. Because they have because of this, they managed to win, because they offered people snake oil, because they said, we're going to give you better services and lower taxes. I guess, even for the Tories, sanity is the price to pay for power. That's the price they paid. They told people, we can give you lower taxes and better services, when this simply is not possible unless you make huge efficiency savings, monumental ones. Politicians from the different parties said they wanted to know how this had happened, who was responsible. The Liberal Democrats who took over the council last year said there'd been a catastrophic failure of leadership from the previous Conservative administration, accused them of, quote, gambling with the public's money. Conservative councillors have said they hope the latest measures would mean a line could be drawn under the sand over what happened, and there's no chance anyone will forget, or anyone should forget, what the Tories have done to this council. They've dragged it into the mud. The opposition party should mention that it was the Tories that did this to the council, both at a national and local level. They should never miss an opportunity to mention it. However, there were also comments about the Lib Dems supporting the regeneration and investment plans when they were in opposition. and people suggested they should take responsibility as well. And I guess the Lib Dems can argue they supported the core ideas of regeneration, but it was the implementation that was the problem. A bit Weasley, I know, but it's going to be the Lib Dems now who are going to have to drop the axe of cuts, and that's never going to make them popular. Look at what happened in 2010. Conclusion: what can we learn from this? Austerity had a way bigger impact on councils than I first thought, with around 25, them facing between, I think, 25 to 50% in cuts, depending on what specific figures you're looking at. And they faced some caps on council tax increases as well, because that's something central government pushed. Instead of using possible tax increases in certain areas or asking, constituents if they would be open to paying more in tax, some of these councils use loans funneled to them via central government to do, with cheap interest and minimal oversight to gamble and raise funds. Playing Monopoly with other people's money is a risky bet, but I'm sure it's more fun than playing Monopoly with your own money. Doing huge, overly ambitious sky towers can be a bad idea. Did they even have the buyers for these flats in this tower? I guess the housing market was pretty hot back then, but what will they do with it now? Over £1 billion on this council alone is projected to hit, I think, 2.4 billion. The government can write off the debt, but how is that fair for taxpayers nationally to write off, bad government debts given to a council? It's evident that, however these infrastructure projects are done, there needs to be way more oversight, a way for the government to work with councils and maybe even the private sector, as dreaded as they are to some people, to build more sustainable housing. But also councils need more funding for day-to-day projects. This Tory myth of being able to provide services and tax cuts needs to go. It's not corruption that got this council into this mess. It's the desire to sell snake oil and economic illiteracy that got us here. Sorry if there was a lot of repetition in this video. Scripting this video is really messy, but not as messy as the books for this council. I had to re-record it as well because, like an idiot, I pressed the wrong button. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments below. I don't think this will be one of those popular videos, but it'll be one of those pieces where some people watch it and I think probably enjoy it to an extent, because how the hell does a council get itself into this much debt? But remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, especially if you want to see more of these longer essay type videos, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.